Hopefully you can bear with me on this one. I just made an entire video and then my computer ate it. So let's go over and do it again. So first thing is that variance and standard deviation are not resistant to outliers. Why is that? Well, the issue here is that the variance and standard deviation are calculated by taking deviations, here, let's make it better, by taking deviations from the mean. The mean is not resistant to outliers, and therefore the standard deviation and variance can't be either. So let me see if that makes sense to you. So we found the variance and the standard deviation by finding this column right here, the deviations. But those deviations were the difference of these values from that mean of 74. But if the mean wasn't resistant to an outlier, then these numbers can't be either because they're built off of that number of 74. If that makes sense. All right, now what about the standard deviation? What does the standard deviation mean? Get it? Mean. Anyway. All right, so standard deviation is the give or take, the wiggle room. And the basic way of interpreting that is going to be by taking the mean plus or minus the standard deviation, but you're going to put it into an English sentence context. You're not just going to say mean plus or minus standard deviation. You're going to say things like, if you were in that class that took the stats exam, you'd expect your grade to be 74. Why 74? Well, because that's what the average was, 74. Give or take 14.1, because that's what the standard deviation is. You could say plus or minus, give or take, whatever. All right? So that's what you're going to write, a sentence basically like that that interprets the mean and the standard deviation together. We don't spend a lot of time interpreting the variance at this stage. The variance is really useful. Don't get into your mind that variance is useless. It's great. It's just not great for what we're going to be working with at this stage. One of the reasons the standard deviation is better is because it has the same unit as your data. So for example, pretend this was dollars, not stats exam scores, but if this was dollars, then standard deviation is also in dollars. Variance would be dollars squared, which is kind of pointless because dollars squared isn't a useful measure of anything. So it is actually very useful, but not in this context. So we're not going to work with it when we ask for interpretations. We're only going to interpret the standard deviation. All right, now what about the algebra exam scores? Well, we found those as well. I found them here in Excel, right here. So here's the exam standard deviation right there, 10.176. Okay, so if S is 10.176, then you'd expect to get 74 on that algebra test, give or take about 10.18. Okay? Now notice what that means also. So that means that the stats exam, because it had an S of 14.1, had more spread than the algebra exams. This makes sense because we could see in the dot plot. Remember the dot plot? Way back, several pages. In example 3 right here, that stats, look at those stats exams. They're the bottom row. See them? They're a lot more spread out from 74. The mean is right here. Let me get you an arrow. The mean 72, oops, is right about there. Okay? If that's the mean, then who's more spread out from that mean? The stats exams. And that's what our numbers backed up. Our numbers backed up that we could see in the stat that the stats exams were more spread out from the mean of 74. Awesome. Okay, now the standard deviations for Wendy's and McDonald's wait times were this and this. And I can prove that to you. Let me go back and find my Wendy's and McDonald's. Here they are. Come here. So STDEV, it's equal STDEV dot S, or just STDEV if you're in old school Excel again. And there's my data. And then I can just drag it along. And there it is. So for Wendy's, it's 0.738. For McDonald's, it's 1.265. And that's what I said right here. So these are sample standard deviations because the group of 30 customers was not the whole population of customers at these stores or restaurants.